I hand over to Mr. Munozi to start today's program. So, Munozi, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So I'm just sharing my screen. So good afternoon, everyone. So as discussed, today's session will be on disaster management, and day one we shall be covering some of the aspects related to the basics of disaster management cycle, pre and post disaster phases. Then there are some legislations which are very relevant from disaster perspective, and the milestone legislation is Disaster Management Act 2005. And there are various other related legal requirements which we shall be covering in detail. Then specific response in different disaster situations with more focus on fire safety, earthquake, and then there are multiple hazards which exist at different types of workplaces. We shall be covering those. Then in tomorrow's session, Dr. Nischal will be taking care of structural and non-structural measures as a part of earthquake response. Then emergency response plan, and some call it as disaster response plan, disaster management plan. We shall be covering the requirements related to emergency response plan, what all it should be part of. Then disaster and pandemics, because in current scenario, pandemic scenario, it becomes very important to understand about COVID-19 aspects and integrate with our existing operations, because this pandemic also is qualified to be a disaster. So this is a medical disaster. So some of the aspects related to pandemics will be covered by Dr. Nishal tomorrow. Roles and responsibilities in disaster, and then we will summarize the session. So this is an introduction about the 2 days workshop on disaster management, which we will be taking care of. And I request all the participants, if you have questions during the sessions, I'll be looking into the chat box. You can put all the questions on chat box. I'll be responding to those questions which are related to the topics. Then you can keep yourself on mute. If you have something to say, you prefer to put your questions on the chat box. If you have anything to add, we'll allow you to speak after the session. So this will be the brief logistics about the session, and you can also switch off your camera if there is no such requirement for the participant. I'm requesting it. And now let's start the session with the basic introduction about disaster. What is disaster? So you can parallelly share your inputs on chat box. I'll be looking into it. What do you think? What is disaster? You can put your comments in the chat box. What do you think? If we are talking about disaster, what does it mean according to you? What different terms related to disasters comes to your mind when we are talking about disaster? What is disaster? So I'll try to make this session interactive by taking inputs from you. We'll have interaction on queries, whatever you have during the session. So I'm again requesting you can send your inputs in the chat box for the definition or inputs related to disaster. It will help all the participant in understanding each other perspective. So let's see what is disaster actually. If you're talking about disaster, disaster is an event. It can be natural or it can be man-made. So that is very broad classification of disaster, which we will discuss in the next slides also. But disaster is an event which impacts with such severity that affected community. Why we are saying community? Because disaster always impacts the larger population. That's why we are using the term community here. Has to respond by taking exceptional measures. It means it is not normal situation. We need to take some exceptional measures to respond perfectly in any disaster situation. So this is a basic definition or the understanding about disaster. But if we go by the legal definition, that is more comprehensive, which we will be discussing in the coming slides, like Disaster Management Act 2005 is the milestone legislation which is dedicated for the disaster, and we will be covering those aspects in this session also. So disaster is a kind of emergency, because we always say that disaster starts from emergency if it is not natural disaster, because this is not true in case of natural disaster, but it is true in case of man-made disaster. Disaster always starts from an emergency. We can say that emergency is a starting point. If we are not able to take perfect response or immediate action in case of emergency, that emergency can convert into a disaster. So disaster always cause damage and destruction. There are different D's related with disaster. We normally say death, disability, distress, disease, displacement, disruption. So all these things are impact of disaster. We have seen so many things in current scenario also, whether it is flood or it is fire or it is now the pandemic situation which we are seeing at this current point of time. So disaster is always a kind of emergency, and if it is not responded perfectly, it can convert into a disaster. So starting point in case of natural, in case of man-made disaster is always an emergency situation. Can you give me some example of emergency situation which are possible for a common man? I need your input in the chat box. Give me some examples of emergency which can be faced by a common man. I hope everyone is able to respond in the chat box. Okay, I'm getting some response. Earthquake, flood. He's saying cyclone, chemical release, COVID-19. Agree. Suresh is also giving the good response. Flood, fire, landslides. Very true. Regional specific situation. Earthquake, cyclone, hailstorm. Yes, very true. Sabotage, yes, that is also a kind of man-made emergency situation. Tsunami is very important, right? Precautions before earthquake, cyclone, flood. Okay, so you have given very correct responses. Terrorist attack is also an emergency situation which can come. There can be localized emergency situation to a certain individuals or certain person, and it can also be a situation that some situation is an emergency for a individual, for a person A, but the same situation is not an emergency with person B. So all depends on the coping capacity of an individual. So it can vary, and it depends on the vulnerability. We will be discussing these terms. Grid disturbance is also an emergency situation if we are talking about the power sector. Vanchi is giving the good input related to it. Entering of flood water in houses, yes, that is also an emergency situation which needs immediate attention. So all these examples are very right. If you see certain examples like fire, chemical explosion, gas leakage, electrical accidents, drowning, cyclone, floods, road accidents. So you will see some examples are related to an individual emergency, but most of these examples are related with the larger population. So if these emergencies we are not able to control it, then it will definitely increase the severity, and if severity is getting increased, scope is getting increased, then it will be disaster. So good response we got on this. Avalanches, earthquake is also a kind of emergency situation. Now let's understand Disaster from the perspective of the legal requirement. What our laws says, what is the disaster? So disaster means a catastrophe, mishap, calamity, or a grave occurrence. So these words are such that it includes each and every type of disaster which we have seen till now in any area arising out of natural or man-made. We already discussed that there can be natural reasons, there can be man-made reason, or it can be by accident or negligence, which results in substantial, and here the word substantial is very important, because when we are talking about disaster, it is substantial loss of life and human suffering or damage. And you can relate this definition very well with COVID-19 situation also these days, or damage to destruction of or degradation of environment. If it is only the degradation of environment that also disturbs human life, then also it will be an environmental disaster and is of such a nature or magnitude as to be beyond the coping capacity of affected community. This is very important line or very important part of disaster definition. When the situation becomes beyond the coping capacity of an affected community, then it will be known as disaster. If it is within the coping capacity of a community or the affected community, then it will not be considered as disaster. It can be counted as emergency, but it may not be the disaster situation. So you should understand and accept that this definition of Disaster Management Act 2005 covers each and every disaster which we have seen till now. So it is very comprehensive definition. It includes all aspects of disasters, all types of disasters it includes. So we have used two different terms till now, emergency and disaster. Is there any difference between two? So now again the question for you, any difference between emergency and disaster? You can say yes or no in the chat box. Or both are the same. You must have understood by now because we discussed that. Yes, there is a difference. We are getting response from Verma Karthik, not the same. Okay, everyone is correct on their response. Pradeep ji also saying yes. Okay, so both are different because the difference is in the scale of impact. When we are talking about emergency situation, yes, you are right, Mr. Chabila Kumar, that every emergency cannot be a disaster. It can be controlled if you are taking right decisions at the right time. But when we are using the term disaster, it means damage is already done. It has already impacted. It is already at bigger scale. And you can see the difference in the slides also. Emergency and disaster can strike anyone, anytime and anywhere. But if you are talking about disaster is like an emergency only, but with a scale. Can you choose, there are some examples in this slide. Can you choose what is emergency and what is disaster? Few people becoming suddenly ill. Is it an emergency or it is disaster? It is an emergency because we are talking about few people only. Earthquake tremors. Earthquake tremors. Now response for earthquake tremors. Pavan Kumar ji is saying it is disaster, but no. Read it correctly. It is only just tremors. Lot of earthquake has come in past 6 to 8 months time period in northern India. That was not a disaster. That was just an emergency situation. We have one question. Can an emergency at first can become disaster later and vice versa? Yes, we already discussed that emergency which has started or initiated as an emergency. For example, fire. It starts with an emergency situation, but if you are not able to control the fire, it can become the disaster situation. It can convert into disaster when the scale is changing. And vice versa may not be true in all the cases, because once we declared something as disaster, it cannot become emergency at later stage. But yes, because that is already declared disaster, that cannot convert into an emergency. But yes, if we are taking right responses, our disaster management and disaster preparedness is perfect, then later on the next phase of disaster can come, but it will be a disaster in that situation. So opposite is not possible. Landslides, if it is at large scale, it will be a disaster, but if it is at localized level, it can be an emergency situation. So all depends on the scale. Power outage, again an emergency situation. Earthquake accidents in buildings, if it is at bigger scale, it will be a disaster situation. Hurricane Katrina, coastal storms are there. Yes, it is a disaster situation. Bomb threat, emergency. Basement flooding of building, emergency situation. Flood is an emergency, but if larger area, it can become disaster. So your questions also responded in this way. So you just see the difference between disaster and emergency. Both are related to each other. Bigger in scale, small in scale. Damage is already done in disaster. Emergency, we have some options, some time that damage can be avoided in emergency situation, because when we are saying emergency, it is defined as an unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for an immediate action. Emergency means we need to take immediate action so that it doesn't convert into a disaster situation. So now I think everyone would be clear about the difference of these emergency and disasters. Now this is very common. We all can differentiate what is natural and what is man-made. Natural, there are lot many example: earthquake, flood, drought, cyclone, tsunami. There can be lot many other examples of natural emergency situation. Man-made covers fire, enemy attack, terrorist attack, bomb explosion, water pollution, communal riots. All these are man-made emergency situation. Can you give some more example of natural emergency situations or man-made emergency situation which is not there in these slides? Some more examples. Forest fire, yes. Where it will come, it will be natural or man-made. Forest fire is natural or man-made? My question to you. Forest fire. Forest fire, some people are saying man-made, some are saying natural. But most of the time it is natural. But these days, a lot of human interventions are there. It is man-made also. Mass food poisoning, health emergency, okay, yes. Current volcanic eruption is again natural emergency situation. Chemical pollution, this is very interesting example of environmental disaster situation. Can you give me real example of chemical pollution? Where is it possible? Chemical pollution. Any real disaster which we have seen? Bhopal gas leakage is very great example. This Bhopal gas tragedy is the largest man-made disaster which India has seen. And after this disaster, there were lot many changes in the legislative framework of India. And after this tragedy in 1984, after 2 years, Environmental Protection Act 1986 came into picture to cover the liabilities and aspects related to the case which has happened in Bhopal, methyl isocyanate leakage. Chernobyl disaster is also another very good example. Currently, Vishakhapatnam gas leak is also an example. Recently in Vizag also, yes, you are very right. Nuclear accidents, yes, man-made emergency. So we have got a lot of inputs related to different types of emergency and disasters examples. Okay. Rising ocean levels. Yeah, these things are also related with the environmental emergency, climate change, which we can say as slow disaster, which we are facing. Even road accidents, if we count, largest killer in India is an example of disaster. Or this can be qualified as disaster, man-made disaster also. Oil spilling in ocean, yes. And if we see the impact of disasters, it can lead to loss of life, loss to property and infrastructure. We all need to accept these facts. Damage to livelihood, economic loss, because this disturbs the complete economical cycle, and you can relate these impacts with current COVID-19 situation also. All of economy is getting impacted across the world. Then definitely environmental damage, flora and fauna is also comes with the disaster, especially in lot many disaster related to forest fire or flooding, which we have seen. Sociological and psychological after effects are also very important, because these days, if you relate these psychological impacts, our routine has completely changed because of this COVID-19 scenario. I'll be taking frequent examples from COVID-19 because we are facing this disaster at this point of time. So you can see that there are a lot of sociological and psychological after effects. And nowadays, mental health becomes very important as part of disaster response in current scenario. And I'll request Dr. Nischal also, who will talk about psychological first aid, which is all related with the psychological impacts of disaster in case of real scenarios. So if we see hazard profile of India, according to some researches, there are this is a hazard profile, like these are the possibility. We are having this much uh, percentage of different disasters which is possible in India, like 59% of our population is exposed to an earthquake scenario. We'll discuss the earthquake scenario separately. 66% of our landmass is prone to drought. 12% approximately is related with the floods, then 8% is related with coastal cyclones, and then there are a lot of other tsunami-like disasters. 25% is prone to landslides. So if we see the earthquake zonation in India, we have one question: COVID-19 is a disaster or emergency? COVID-19 is definitely a disaster without any doubt. It is an ongoing disaster. We are in the response phase of this COVID-19 scenario. So COVID-19 is a disaster, Mr. Pavan Kumar. So earthquake, if we see that 59% of our landmass is prone to earthquake, and if you see the zonation, we have a detailed discussion tomorrow on this zonation and structural, non-structural part. But let's understand brief, what is this zonation all about? I'll show you the zonation chart. If you see, India geographically is divided into different zones: zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. So this zonation is done basis on multiple factors, which includes the geographical conditions, plate tectonics, which is a science related to earthquake. We are not going into depth of the technical aspects of plate tectonics and all, but you need to understand that uh, approximately 59% of India is coming in zone 3, 4, and 5. And zone 3, if we are saying, it means moderate risk quakes up to magnitude 6.9 Richter scale. And zone 4, if we are saying, which is in brown color, high risk quakes up to magnitude 7.9. Can you give me like Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh? In Madhya Pradesh, which zone is coming according to this zonation map? Madhya Pradesh is zone 2, correct. And if we look into Jammu and Kashmir, what are the zones available in this map? Zone 3 and Zone 4. And similarly, if you see, Gujarat has Zone 3, Zone 4, and Zone 5 also. Zone 5 is the region where Bhuj earthquake came. So this country is divided into the different zones according to the possible earthquake uh, magnitude up to certain levels, which has been segregated in these different zones. So according to this hazard profile, if we see the flood, 40 million hectares are prone to flood. So India's landmass of 40 million hectares are prone to flood, and especially the Brahmaputra and Gangetic basins are the most flood prone areas, starting with the northeastern areas and then the eastern UP. The northwest region of the west flowing rivers like Krishna, Kaveri, and Mahanadi are another flood prone areas where we are seeing flood, like Bihar is a very good example. Okay. So we are getting response that PPT is not clear. Okay, so this image which you are seeing is very indicative image. I am just reading certain important points out of this PPT, but I think this should not be the problem with everyone. Mr. Pradeep is saying that PPT is not clear. Some slides may have pictures which is of very low resolution, so there might be issue in that in these slides. Or PPT may not be clear sometimes because of the network issue at your end. Okay. So sometimes it becomes hazy. It means there might be network issue.
So you can switch off your video and run the presentation only. So
okay, I'll do it so that we can better use the bandwidth. Yeah, hope it should be clear now comparatively.
yeah, now we can check. Yes, sir. You can just move forward.
Okay. Okay, fine. So some people are asking PPT will be shared. Yeah, PPT and certain content will be shared. Still, I'll request you to note down certain things because that gives more absorption of this learning. So are you prepared to face such emergency or disaster situations? What preparation have you done at your organization level? Have you prepared disaster management plans? If you have prepared disaster management plans, what type of exercises you have done? So these questions should come in your mind, and we need to understand our legal framework also related to these disasters, because these things becomes very important when real disaster or emergency situations are happening. So what would you do in case of chemical explosion or leaks? We all will deal with different types of chemicals. It is not like that only chemical industries will have chemical explosion. It can happen at any place. Even the battery explosion can lead to lot of fire at any place. So that is also a disaster. How would you respond to a flood situation? What type of preparedness has been done? So we need to take quick decision in emergency situations. So for that quick decision, we are spending time now so that we can get ready response in real disaster situations. So we need to prepare our team in such a way that our response is perfect. Our response is immediate, because if we are delaying our response, if our response is incorrect, then it will be that emergency will become disaster definitely. So our priority is to reduce the impact. So now let's see the disaster management cycle. So this is such a basic and very relevant concept that you can relate this concept with each and every type of disaster which is possible. Disaster management cycle. Now my question to you, what is the first stage in this disaster management cycle? Suresh Kumarji is giving input, fire in crackers industry. Yes, relevant example. Now we are getting response first stage in disaster management cycle. Some people are saying planning, preparation, planning, but there is no planning stage in this slide mentioned. Planning, preparation, capacity building. Okay, so most of the responses are indicating preparation as the first stage of disaster management. Okay, pre-impact. No. So preparation, most of the responses are indicating that preparation should be the correct response. If we go by the audience poll, like in KBC, audience poll will become incorrect because preparation is not the first stage of disaster management cycle. Do you want to guess another option? Response is also wrong. You are getting capacity building, but specify what is the first stage team to be made ready. Capacity building, yes. Mitigation, yes. Shubham Gaur is correct now. Mitigation is the first stage of disaster management cycle. Chabila Kumar Sahu is also correct now. Mitigation is the first stage. Why mitigation is the first stage of disaster management cycle? Why? Identification of risk areas. We mitigate the risk to reduce the impact. What is mitigation? Can anyone of you just give some keywords to understand the meaning of mitigation? We all should understand this meaning of mitigation, because nowadays the term disaster management is converting into something else. After this understanding of disaster management cycle, I'll tell you our disaster management is moving towards something else. Now we don't say disaster management. We don't prefer to say disaster management. There are some other terms which we use nowadays. Mitigation is reducing the severity. No. See, partially correct, I would say. Taking preventive steps, Mr. K. Murali Krishna is saying. Then Shri Harish is saying reducing the effect of an incident is mitigation, adopting measures to reduce the risk of. Okay, this one is looks perfect. Mr. Babu, adopting measures to reduce the risk of occurrence or no. So starting was correct. It is not reducing the risk of occurrence of disaster, because in natural disaster, how can reduce the risk of occurrence? It will happen without your control. We don't have any control in disaster, especially in natural disasters. Reduce or eliminate the impact and risk hazard. This is correct term now. Reduce or eliminate the impact and risk hazard. Okay, so let's make it more simplified. Give some examples. I'll correct these terms. And let's understand this mitigation word, because this mitigation is very important and it is a first stage of disaster management cycle. First stage of disaster management cycle. What is mitigation? The definition from Shubham Gaur is correct now. Reduce or eliminate the impact and risk hazard. In simple terms, if I say mitigation is some measures to minimize the impact of any potential emergency or disaster. And it will be more clear with some examples. For example, Mr. Babu is saying putting fire extinguisher. Okay, so suppose in any infrastructure you have identified that there is a possibility of fire as an emergency. So whatever measures you are taking to mitigate, to reduce the impact of fire will come under mitigation. For example, installation of fire extinguisher, very simple example. It will become mitigation measure, and we are getting very interesting example from Mr. Arjun KD. Janta curfew is the first step for COVID disaster. Okay, so this is not mitigation. If real disaster has happened, and we are taking some actions, then it is not mitigation. Mitigation is always prior to real disaster situation. So the example is interesting, but it was incorrect. Forecasting the weather, erection of bunds to fight floods. Yes, erection of bunds to fight the floods in case of, so to avoid certain areas getting flooded or impacted by flood. For example, in powerhouses, there are a lot of critical equipments are there. So to protect those critical equipments from flooding, if you make bunding, that is a mitigation measure. Before disaster, if you are taking such actions, that will be qualified as mitigation. Installation of AC in server room. Yes, you can relate this with an emergency related to equipment. Equipment failure, building immunity before diseases mitigation. Correct. So for all those people who were already investing their time, their physical exercise in increasing the immunity before COVID-19, that was mitigation measure. Or now you start taking advanced measure for any upcoming possible disaster situation, that will be qualified as mitigation measure. So that is very good example of mitigation you all have given. So mitigation is always the first step. So once we have taken the first step, uh, these must be known to each and every person involved in your organization. Suppose you have taken a lot of fire safety measures, lot of earthquake resistance structure you have made. For example, if we take the example of dam, nowadays there are a lot of stringent norms are coming related to dam safety. So if you have taken, and it is not a choice, that is mandatory requirement these days in any case, you need to mitigate the earthquake risk. If you are installing or if you are erecting dam in any earthquake zone, that is a mandatory requirement, that is a mitigation. But if the population or the team who is involved in maintaining those dams are not aware about those mitigation measures, those mitigation will start failing. Okay, so capacity building is also required along with that mitigation. uh, next stage in this is preparation. You have taken all mitigation measures, you have all the installation of fire systems available with you, you have the installation of, you have prepared the emergency kit for flood scenario. Okay, so mitigation measures are sufficient, but still you need to prepare yourself. If you have monsoon weather conditions are coming in next 15 days, your team will definitely take some preparation before possible emergency in the season. So preparation will become your step, which is just prior to the real impact or disaster situation. Then there will be an on-site event, which may be emergency or which may be disaster. So once disaster has come, it will be response stage. So at what stage we are in COVID-19 at this point of time? We are in preparation, or we are in response, or we are in recovery now? Can we say that we are in recovery? We are still in response phase. We are still responding to COVID-19. The risk is still there. Mr. Amitabh Bachchan is regularly saying this on phone calls whenever you are making any phone call. So we need to respond and get ready accordingly. So once this gets over, response gets over after a certain period of time, then it will be a recovery phase. So after every recovery phase, why we are going back to mitigation? Can you give me reason? After recovery phase, why we are entering into mitigation phase again? I need input from you for the future. Why we are again going for mitigation? Because after every, yeah, Mr. Harish is giving very correct response. Learning from the response is very important. So the learning which we are getting from COVID-19 phase at this point of time is very relevant, and we will definitely be responding better. We will definitely be taking more mitigation measure for any pandemic situation lot of companies are now ready to face another pandemic situation because they have prepared well. They have taken those learnings from this ongoing disaster situation. And same way, if any particular company or organization is facing real emergency or disaster situation, their mitigation measures in comparison to the organization who has not faced anything will be far better because they have learned from the response and recovery, and it is not the best way. We should learn from others. That's why we can take the perfect mitigation measures. So if something has happened to another organization, we need to take learning from them. And this is all about disaster management cycle. Why we are saying disaster management cycle? Disaster management cycle. This is cyclic in nature. After every disaster and emergency situation, we will take certain action, we will take learning, and we will include them in our mitigation, which becomes the first stage again. And this cycle will keep on going, and our response, our preparedness will get improved over a period of time. Okay. So now I want responses from all of you. Everyone is comfortable in understanding. Are you getting my points, or you want to change anything or any input? You can add now if you want to suggest anything about the session. Otherwise, I'll keep on continuing with this same speed. Okay, so there is one question which is coming from Mr. GSS Verma Sharma ji. Please differentiate between preparation and response. Okay. So one question related to disaster management cycle is coming. Differentiate between preparation and response. Preparation is just before the real disaster or emergency situation. It is pre-impact stage, and response is you are facing the real disaster situation. You are responding to actual emergency or disaster situation. That is the main difference. One, preparation is pre-disaster and response is after disaster or during disaster. And you might see that I'm continuously using the two terms, emergency and disaster, and you should be very clear why we are using these two terms, because both are related to each other in case of man-made situations, but in natural disaster is disaster. Okay, so we got input that session is going good. Okay, thanks for responding. Pre-crisis, crisis, and post-crisis. Yes, Irfan ji, you're right. So aspects of disaster management includes, and this should be part of your strategy in your organization also, mitigation, preparedness, rescue, relief, rehabilitation, and recovery. Is it initial loss and enveloped loss? No, see, this is not related with the loss, but these stages, preparation is just before the onset of disaster. I'll give you more example just to clarify this thing, because this question is coming again. When you say that in case of monsoon, I gave you example of flood, there is a possibility of flood. So whatever preparation any organization will do before actual flood, like purchasing of different life jackets, purchasing of different boats or ropes or some rescue kits related to flooding, that will become example of preparation. But if there is no flood in that season, then this stage will be only till preparation. But if they face real flood and they start taking some action, they will start using some of the strategies which they have identified in the preparation, like opening of gates or the barrages according to different levels of water. That will become response. Okay. So I think Mr. Sharma, now you will be very clear. Evacuation of population from area likely to be impacted by cyclone or flood is mitigation or preparation. Okay, evacuation of population from area likely to be impacted. When we are saying likely to be impacted, it means it is pre-disaster situation. It is preparation. It is not mitigation in that case, Mr. Pradeep. Okay. Great. So this disaster management cycle, you will be able to relate with all types of disaster, which can come any place to any organization or any geography. And these are the aspects of disaster management: mitigation, preparedness, rescue, relief, rehabilitation. We shall be discussing on these. Mitigation, we discussed whatever efforts we are taking to reduce the loss of life and property, permanent reduction of risk of disaster, risk reduction. So whatever initiatives we are taking to reduce the impact of disaster is coming under mitigation. It includes education and training, like we are doing this training session now. There is no disaster which is waiting for us, and still we are doing disaster management session. Apart from this COVID-19 situation, we are discussing lot many aspects. So this is training and awareness. We are doing mitigation. Everyone who is part of this training session is getting awareness on disaster situations. So this is mitigation. Then preparedness, we discussed activities prior to disaster. We have discussed all these points. Preparedness in the form of money, manpower, and material. Whatever preparedness we are doing, it will come under preparedness. Okay. We are getting one question. Please give an example of mitigation and preparedness, preparation both. Okay. So I'll take an example of fire here. In fire, installation of fire sprinkler system in the building is an example of mitigation and preparation. Suppose there is a fire. Now you are preparing your team to send there and then go and arrange all the extinguisher at one place and start firefighting. Or if you feel that in certain situation, just before any possible fire situation, if you do some kind of preparation related to the fire safety, for example, you are procuring some specialized equipment for firefighting, that becomes the example of preparation. You may feel some overlap between mitigation and preparation, but the difference between two is mitigation is always very advanced level of action before any possibility of disaster arises. It is in the very initial phase of any organizational activity, but preparation is just before the disaster possibility is coming. So whatever additional steps you are taking as part of responding to make your response perfect will come under preparation. Okay, Mr. Parasuraman is also saying difference between preparation and mitigation. Okay, so this is explained now. So training, disaster management plans, institutions, dedicated teams. Post-disaster phase includes rescue, relief, rehabilitation. It is in the sequence. The first priority is to rescue. For example, when India faced the COVID-19 situation, from Government of India, a lot of rescue operations started to evacuate the persons from COVID-19 affected countries. That was the rescue phase. Now, India has given a lot of relief in terms of taxation, and there are some other relief related to timelines which has been given to each and every individual of this country. That is an example of relief. Rehabilitation, so this may come into picture when there are some rehabilitation required, like shifting of some population to other area. So this is more related to if I give you example of flood affected area or tsunami affected area. if any coastal area is getting the possibility of tsunami, so they may start rehabilitating, shifting them to the safe areas that will come in under rehabilitation. So if you see, there are different features of a disaster. Unpredictability, unfamiliarity, speed, uncertainty, threat. Whatever preparedness we are doing in different disaster phase, it will always be uncertain. There will always be uncertain situation. There will always be some kind of threat. It comes without any notice, spontaneous. So these are some of the common features of a disaster which we normally see. Okay, and these are the common principles which you all can apply in your disaster management planning which you have done. And now another very interesting example question I would ask from you. I was just explaining that these days disaster management term is replaced with something else. What is the other term which we are using other than disaster management? Emergency preparedness, no. Crisis, no. Risk assessment, no. That is part of disaster management only. Management, crisis management, no. Quick response, no. See, if you listen the word disaster management, it always seems that disaster is coming and we need to manage something for it. Okay, so the nowadays the different term is disaster preparedness. Now focus has shifted from response to preparedness, response to mitigation. So since the focus of disaster management is nowadays changing, earlier focus was let disaster comes and then we will respond it. More focus was to increase the response stage, increase the perfection in the response stage. Okay, but now this action or the focus is shifting from response to mitigation. So disaster preparedness is another term which is more correct instead of disaster management. Okay, and even nowadays resilience is also coming into talk. Resilience is another ability to face different types of disaster, ability to respond quickly in case of disaster. So we need to increase the resilience. So if we see the principles of disaster management, and you can apply these principles to all your disaster management planning which you have done, to have a clear and logical approach to dealing with disaster. Rapid management, yeah, quick. So to have a clear and logical approach to dealing with disaster, to provide common references to all departments and authorities with roles, to assist with information for setting up a multifunctional organization structure, to form a basis for coordinated action, because that is very important in real disaster or emergency situation, to provide clear allocation of responsibilities, to form, because this allocation of responsibility should be done well in advance. Otherwise, in a real disaster situation, if you start allocating the responsibility, nobody will accept. So you need to do all these things. Okay, so these are like pre-disaster phase you need to do to give focus on disaster related trainings. Okay, so now let's enter into the legal aspects of disasters. And whatever we are discussing, I would like to showcase something like one case study which is related with disaster management. And this case study is something which is an eye opener, and all of you will agree that these things are not theoretical, and actually these things are contributing. I'm just taking you right on that. Yes. So disaster management plays very important role, and this is a case study. If you go through this, on 12th November 1970, just give me a second. Okay. So on 12th November 1970, major cyclone hit the coastal belt of Bangladesh at 223 km per hour with a storm surge of 6 to 9 meters height, killing an estimated population of huge number of population like 5 lakhs. So this was a major disaster which Bangladesh faced in 1970s. So after this disaster, they started disaster management planning. Lot of initiatives were taken by them, and after 21 year another cyclone, because that geographical location is such that lot of cyclones and these kinds of weather situations creates at that particular geographical situation. Another storm came in 1991, and the speed of the storm was comparatively higher, like 225 km per hour, and it killed only 1,38,000. So with the disaster management planning which they have done in last 20 years, they could save approximately 60% of the population if we go by the data. And in May 1994, another storm cyclone came, 250 km per hour, and only 127 people lost their life. Though people lost their life, but it was the success of disaster management planning which they had implemented. And similarly, in 1997, another storm of 200 km uh, per hour came, and only 111 people lost their life. And then in this span of approximately 27 years, the population of the area goes had doubled. So the number of persons who were facing this disaster was double than the original in 1970. So this disaster management planning plays very important role, very important role. Okay. So before starting the earthquake section, I'll discuss some of the legal aspects of disaster management, and you should check what kind of preparedness you have done related to disaster management, some of the common laws which we will be seeing. Here is small exercise. Can you spot the legal issue from this image? From these images, can you spot any legal issue which you can identify? I'm waiting for your input. If there is any legal issue which you can identify, like I'll give you one example. Disposal. Okay. So one legal issue is related to disposal. Lot of waste we are seeing. There can be different types of waste mixed. It can be a legal issue. Immigration, like you can see the response forces are moving from one place to other, or it can be international support. So immigration can be an issue. Use of animals, yes, supporting animals, shifting of animals can be a legal issue. Responsibility of weak structure which leads to loss. Okay. Structural stability can be a legal issue. So there are a lot of issues which we can relate with the disasters. Now let's see what kind of legal frameworks are related to disaster in India. Can you give some example of laws related to disaster management in India? There are multiple variety of laws are there. I'll not go into detail of these laws, but at least you will get an exposure. DM Act is very relevant example. Mr. Irfan has given Disaster Management Act 2005. And what triggered India to frame this act in 2005? Some disaster was faced by India just before this act came into picture. What triggered Disaster Management Act in 2005? 2004 earthquake, tsunami. Yes, tsunami is the correct answer. So tsunami was there in 2004 and India lost approximately 11,000 number of persons, and it could be more than that. So after this tsunami, our governments they thought that there should be dedicated law for disaster management, and they framed Disaster Management Act 2005 after we faced tsunami in 2004. Okay, some more legislation examples are coming. Those are very interesting. Gas cylinder rule, yes, related to disasters. So whatever law is, we can relate with the safety, environment, health, will become part of disaster related law. So this gas cylinder rule is related to safety, and it is very good example of disaster related law. Yes. Environmental Protection Act 1986 is also relevant disaster related law in India. Gas cylinder rule 2016. There is one question whether building design has covered earthquake criteria. Okay, this is not a question. This is input on the image which Mr. Pradeep has given. Okay. Okay, see, related to disaster law, if you want to see comprehensive coverage of all the laws, can you, I'll give you one very authentic source of this information. Let me send this information through chat box. There is disaster law book. Okay. So I have shared one link in the chat box. If you click on this link, Irfan is very fast. The same link has been posted by Irfan also. So this includes the compendium of laws on disaster management. It was published in January 2015. And this is very comprehensive document, 652 pages document. It covers all the laws which exist in India related to disasters. And I would like to show you this book just for a quick reference. I'm just sharing my screen having this compendium. Okay. Just wait for a moment. Compendium of laws on disaster management, 652 pages document. Where to share? Yeah, I'm sharing my screen having this compendium. PowerPoint, browse. No. Okay, so you must be seeing my screen now.
Yes, sir.
This is Compendium of Laws on Disaster Management for India, published in January 2015 by National Disaster Management Authority, Government of India, and it is very comprehensive document. You can see the page number, 652 pages are there, and it covers all the laws related to disaster management. I'll show you the index. So these are very old codes and acts which has been covered: Indian Penal Code, Indian Evidence Act, Civil Defense Act 1968, Wildlife Protection Act. So you will see the complete list. Environmental Protection Act, which is like umbrella legislation on various environmental related legislation. And why I'm showing and giving you the source of this law book, because while preparing your disaster management plan, you need to uh, take different inputs and expectation of these laws in your disaster management planning. Okay. The Factory Act 1948, nowadays this has been this is transforming into Occupational Safety and Health Code, OSH Code 2020, Public Liability Insurance Act. So all these acts are given in this. Biological diversity related. Disaster Management Act 2005 is also covered. Food Safety and Standard Authority of India. So now you should be able to relate food safety with disasters, because poisoning at bigger level can also be a disaster situation. Disaster Management, NDRF rules 2008, Cultural Heritage. Okay, there are different chapters related to the safety related legislation like Boilers Act, Mindset, Indian electricity rules. So this is related with a lot of power companies. The Coal Mines Regulation Act. Even for dams also, if you see, there are separate bill which has come now. The Explosive Act 1884, Petroleum Act, Atomic Energy Act. So all these laws are related with disasters and is covered in compendium of laws. Atomic Energy, Dam Safety Bill. So this was initially initiated in 2010. Now again in 2019, this bill has been cleared by Lok Sabha, but it has not become act because this is yet to published, yet to become law. So this bill talks about National Dam Safety Authority, dedicatedly looking after the safety and disaster aspects which can come from dams, because we are the third largest country. We are the third country who have the largest number of dams across the world. So this is still yet to come, but we have the Dam Safety Bill 2019 with us. Okay, and there are various chapters. So you can see there are a lot of coverage of legislations are there, and it includes all these aspects. So it can be like reference for all the laws related to disaster. You can download it directly. It is publicly available document. It is available with you, available in the link. Okay. Now moving back to the slides again. I'm just shifting to different presentation, I think. Yes, now. Okay, so the slide is visible now. You can respond. Okay, it is from the okay. But there's some issue. I'm seeing the page one but I'm showing the different page. So some issue I'm facing. Let me close it and open it again. So just give me a moment. I'm facing some issue in sharing the presentation again. It is showing some error message. Oh, it is opening some different presentation. Okay.
So firstly, sir, stop sharing, then again start sharing. Because your screen is shared and there is one error message.
Okay. Okay. I think. Yeah. It is. It is coming now.
Yes.
So we were discussing the legislation part. Let me keep it on. Okay. So we were discussing. So this compendium of laws on disaster management is very good reference point. There are a lot of disaster laws issues in India related to disaster protection, accountability. So these issues were solved after Disaster Management Act 2005. Responsibility of state government, central government, and the district level authorities, community related issues. So all those issues were solved. But if we talk about the international references of legislation, we have signed the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. That was a conference happened in uh, 2015, Sendai, Japan, and it talks about strengthening the disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk. And with this Sendai framework, a lot of inclusion has been done in our legislation, in our policy, which has been included as a part of National Disaster Management Plan. India also have dedicated in National Disaster Management Plan evolved by National Executive Committee. So apart from Disaster Management Act 2005, there are some references of disaster management like Article 31, 38, 1 of Indian Constitution says proper disaster management measures are for the welfare of the people and the state is under constitutional obligation to strive for it. It means disaster is a state subject. So India, a disaster is considered as a state subject. So let's take an overview of Disaster Management Act 2005, what all it says, what all it provides. It has authoritative definition of disaster and disaster management, which we have seen. You all have gone through the comprehensive definition of disaster. Multilateral institutional structure for disaster management in a country like national level, state level, district level, and then local authorities level has been given. If we go by the laws, what does it provide for measures for adopted by various government departments and ministries for disaster management? Lot of ministries and departments are related with different disaster situations. Like for flood, we have Central Water Commission. For fire, we have Ministry of Home Affairs. So this is just an example. So it has provision for raising and maintenance and of force titled National Disaster Response Force, which came into picture in 2008, and this is working very perfectly across India. Uh, so if we read the law, what is disaster management. So the detail of disaster management is also given there. I'm not going into detail of each and every word, but just to give you an exposure, what our disaster management act is saying. I'm just scrolling down these aspects. Like disaster management means a continuous and integrated approach of planning, organizing, coordinating, and implementing measures which are necessary for a threat. So you can relate this disaster management with the disaster management cycle, which we already discussed. And this is institutional framework for disaster management in our country. NIDM is there, National Institute of Disaster Management. I do lot of training workshops for National Institute of Disaster Management. We had recently conducted community outreach program on various uh, disasters. That was very successful session. So NIDM is a kind of institute that's dedicated for disaster management. We have NDRF, Disaster Response Force. NDMA is the apex body who takes care at the central level, National Disaster Management Authority, and it has reporting from state disaster management authorities in all the states. Then National Executive Council is also there. Okay, so one question is, can you repeat the article number in the Constitution? Article number was 38(1), which has mention of disaster management, that it is related with the welfare of humans and people. So this is article number 38(1). Then NEC is National Executive Council, who is like releasing guidelines on different subjects related to disasters. Then SDMA at state level, State Disaster Management Authorities, state governments and its departments and ministries are by default the stakeholders of disaster management. So this is our institutional framework. At district level, we have District Disaster Management Authority, head by the topmost person like district collector, and then state level we have State Disaster Management Authority headed by Chief Minister, and at center level we have NDMA chaired by Prime Minister of India. So all the topmost government authorities are available in these top positions. We also have national plan. Functional components of national plan includes different measures and targets related to disaster management. I'm not going into details of these things, but you need to understand it very like in explicitly, very clearly. It is written in Disaster Management Act 2005 that you need to, every government department or building needs to have a dedicated disaster management plan with them. So if you're part of any organization, every government department or organization should have its disaster management plan in place, and you need to review this plan on regular basis. And for power companies especially, this disaster management plan structure is identified. I'll show you the structure of disaster management plan also after we discuss the specific sections on earthquake and fire safety, because if we consider the highest possible disaster which is natural in nature is earthquake, and flood also it comes next, and if we say that highest possible the most risky disaster is fire, that is man-made situation. So first, let's understand some aspects of earthquake, but we shall go into detail of earthquake tomorrow by Dr. Nishchal, who will cover various initiatives and required requirements related to earthquake. Pradeep ji is giving input. Cyclone is also important. Yes. Yeah. See, we were talking about the highest risk include in the disaster, that is in man-made it is known as for fire, and in natural it is from earthquake. So earthquake, this zonation we have already seen, but if I ask a very simple question from all of you, what do we do in case of earthquake tremors? What should we do in case of earthquake tremor? What is the right response? And why we are discussing at this point of time now? Because our response will be perfect if we have prepared well. If our mitigation measures are perfect. Lot many people are responding lie on ground, move towards open area. Okay. Some more response. What should be our perfect response? This is the question. I'll come to previous slides after this question. So this is the question you can answer. You can choose the correct answer. So there is a situation. If you are at first floor, what will you do during earthquake tremors? Now answer it. One and four. Okay. Mr. Chabila is saying 1 and 4. Take shelter under table. 3. Some people are saying 3. Mr. Suresh is saying 3. Another Mr. Suresh Kumar Madurai from Madurai is saying 3. We also got one response 2. Mr. K. Muruganatham. Okay. So 2, 3, 4. We have got all the responses till now. Which one is correct? Or there are multiple correct response. Mr. Vanchi Nathan is also responding. Shubham Gaur, 3. Okay. Nikhilesh ji saying 4. Mr. Anurag is 2, 3, 4. 3 responses. We will get confused. What should we do? So read the question again. This is a question related to what should we do during earthquake tremors? If we are at first floor, run towards staircase and hide under strong object. This is completely wrong response. Third option is very incorrect. Why? Because during earthquake tremors, it is just a fraction of second. If there is a possible collapse situation, and if you are running towards the staircase, it will impact us a lot. But instead of running towards staircase during collapse situation, if we are taking drop cover and hold on, there will be 2 benefits. One, it will save us from head injury, and second, it will give us some space for breathing in case of collapse situation also. I'll show you one video which is very interesting, and you will get to know that what should be our ideal response, why this drop cover and hold on is successful. Okay, I am just sharing one video. You just look into it. Okay.
In more recent times, California has experienced.
I hope you are able to see my screen. Video is visible and you are getting the audio also.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. You just see and then we'll discuss about drop cover and hold on.
Significant quakes with both the Loma Prieta and northwards earthquakes. Scientists do not yet have the information needed to predict earthquakes, and no region within the state is immune from the potential for major earthquake damage.
Good morning, Carmen.
When you feel the first ground motions, you must immediately drop to the floor. Take cover under a desk or table, If you're not near a desk or table, drop to the floor against an interior wall.
So this is a perfect drop, cover and hold on position, and the benefit of this position is that it will save us from the possible head injury in case of collapse, building collapse also. So instead of wasting time in running and moving to some other place, we should take this position, drop, cover and hold on, even if there is no strong furniture or strong objects are available where we can hide ourselves.
Resist the urge to panic. Stay put and do not move from under the shelter. Research has shown that most injuries occur when people inside buildings attempt to move to a different location inside the building or try to leave it. So, do not run outside where you could be vulnerable to the danger of falling debris. Stay away from windows, bookcases, cabinets, or other objects that could topple and fall. Hold on until the shaking stops. The reason to hold on to the desk or table is if it moves, you move with it. At a desk or table located near a window, get underneath it and pull your chair in as close as you can to shield yourself from possible breaking glass. Again, resist the urge to panic and flee. Remain calm even though you may witness the loss of electricity, the sound of various alarms, and activation of the fire sprinkler system. Do not be surprised by the noise from broken glass, creaking walls, or falling objects. The main thing to remember is remain calm and resist fleeing. If you're inside, stay inside. If you're outside, stay there. Resist the urge of running toward a building. Instead, find a safe location and drop, cover, and hold. Try to move to an open area, away from overhead power lines, building facades, architectural embellishments, or windows. If you're confined to a wheelchair, lock your wheels. Lean forward and cover your neck with your hands and arms. If you're in a stairwell, drop and cover next to an interior wall. Remain there until the tremor stops and follow directions that are announced over the public address system. In the restroom, remain there and cover your head with your arms and protect yourself from falling objects. If you're driving, gradually decrease speed. Pull over to the side of the road and stay in the vehicle until the shaking stops. Do not stop under overpasses or bridges. Turn on the radio and keep in mind aftershocks follow the initial quake. Do not begin to drive until local authorities have deemed it is safe to do so.
The city has just been hit by an earthquake.
So this was more of individual response, which you should know that during tremors, it is always advisable to take this position, drop, cover and hold on. You might have some questions related to it. Again, I'm facing this issue. So any question related to the video which you have seen?
Participant can mute yourself to ask the question.
I'm again
Not seen
facing
properly,
this
sir. Can't
Mr.
seen
Ajam,
properly.
Mr. Ajam Sharma, you can ask your question.
Yes, not seen properly.
Okay, video was not visible perfectly.
This video
Yes,
is
sir.
Okay, see, the video was only to make you understand that how this drop, cover and hold on position needs to be taken. So the position is in such like you lie down on the ground, bend your face in the knees, and then hold your hands, one hand above your neck, and then second hand you can retain your position at some particular place. You can take support from any the constant object. So that is drop, cover and hold on position which was shown in the video. Now,
Okay.
yeah. I'm trying to show my screen again. This issue is coming. This PPT is opening inside the team app, but I want to show my screen. Can anyone from IT team help me now?
yes, sir.
Again. So can you
Yes, sir.
disconnect the screen and then I want to share it again as my screen. It is opening the presentation inside the team app now.
Just a minute, sir. Just.
I don't know why this sharing is getting inside the.
Now it's okay,
Let
sir.
me let me try now. I think now it's fine. Yes, now it's fine. So every time I play video, so this error is coming. Okay. Okay. So any other question related to the video? See, it is the clear message was there should not be any confusion during earthquake tremors. We should not evacuate. We should always follow drop, cover, and hold on. But after tremors are over, the emergency response team of the organization can take decision to start evacuation accordingly. Okay. So now let's quickly see the fire safety. So according to fire accident statistics in India, NCRB report is released in 2020. This is National Crime Records Bureau. The report was released in 2020, somewhere in the month of July or June, sorry. And this data is from 2018. So approximately 35 Indians die in fire accidents daily. And there are 12,748 deaths because of fire accidents in 2018. So you can understand the severity of fire from this data. And there is very recent, very serious accident from Delhi where there were 43 deaths because of fire. I'm not going into detail of this case study, but this case study is just to trigger you fact that fire is very serious situation. It can take lot of uh, it can impact a lot of high number of populations. Okay, so if we go by the basics of fire, so this is not this should not be part in detail in this session, but it includes the three different elements and you all must be aware about those three elements. These things are very simple. Can any one of you answer this one? What are the three elements of fire? Heat, fuel, and oxygen. Okay. Heat, fuel, and oxygen are the three elements of the fire. So, so this becomes the triangle of fire. So whatever mitigation, now from the disaster management perspective, understand that we need to prepare our building, our spaces to respond perfectly in case of fire situation. So there must be clear understanding of our codes, and you know what code apply, what document or standard is available related to fire safety in India, which should be covered in your mitigation planning related to fire safety. The name of standard related to fire is National Building Code 2016. I'm not going into detail of the basics of this fire safety, heat, fuel, oxygen, how it becomes fire, and removal of each element can reduce the risk of fire, break the. I'm skipping slides considering the time, and we will go we'll take more details in next session tomorrow. But some of the important facts from the disaster management perspective we are covering today, and then rest of the section related to fire safety we shall be covering tomorrow. So there are different methods related to fire safety. It can lead to loss of life, damage to property, loss of business, and in power sector also there are very like significant number of fire incidents which has happened, and it always leads to the loss of goodwill, loss of confidence among employees also if we are not taking proper actions. So National Building Code is the one standard which is having complete reference of each and every fire safety aspect in India. And internationally, if we say that internationally what standard is available, internationally, National Fire Protection System is National Fire Protection Agency, NFPA standards are available. There is one question related to this fire safety, whether the deluge system is tested when transformers are in energized conditions. Okay. So normally during testing of deluge system, transformer is kept in off position or power disconnected position, because we don't want to increase the complexity. We want to just test the deluge system. So that's why it is always preferable to test the system in power disconnect mode to avoid the recovery time period of the transformer. Otherwise, you will have to wait for the complete dryness of transformer, then you can start that. And these types of testing has been done during my training sessions to NHPC. If some participants are from NHPC, these types of testing were done in Salal and Dulasti. Dulasti we have not done. Salal we have done this testing, and it was done in power off mode. NFPA is international standard related to fire safety. Okay, so the important and very basic understanding about fire is that initially the fire is always small. If we see the stages of fire, it is very, very small. We can take small initiatives to control this fire situation. Incipient stage or beginning stage, we call it as. But once the fire has entered into the free burning stage, then it becomes uncontrollable. Your small equipments like extinguishers may not be of use in that situation. So the action should be very quick in incipient stage. Otherwise, it will become devastating. Okay. So this is a very basic understanding, but I'll prefer to take the fire session tomorrow, considering the time available with us for the today's session, because we will be ending this session at 4:30. So I'll continue taking fire safety session tomorrow, and then we will start with the medical emergency, pandemics, COVID-19, and earthquake, structural and non-structural, which Dr. Nischal introduced us. Okay, so we shall cover the basics of fire safety and related with disaster management in the next session tomorrow. But before we end the session, I would like to show you something from Central Electricity Authority, CEA regulations 2011, because most of the participants I understand are from the power companies and related companies. So let me show you Central Electricity Authority Regulation 2011. So this talks about the structure of disaster management. This talks about the structure of disaster management plan, which should be available, and I'm opening that, which should be available with the organization. Okay, and we can talk in details, and we can take questions related to this structure also. This is an elements of on-site emergency management plan for electrical plants and electric lines. So all those organizations who qualify to be an electrical plant and electrical lines like power transmission में जो भी हैं, then this structure will become a mandate requirement from our Central Electricity Authority Regulations 2011. So you just go through the structure. Okay. It has different section. It includes the following: name and address of the chief incident controller. Chief incident controller is the one who leads the emergency response team. He is the one person who decides in case of any emergency situation. Alarm system and method of reporting, declaring emergency. How will you declare? What are the protocols available with you? Emergency response procedures, details of keys, key employee of emergency team, responsibility. So this is all structure given in our Central Electricity Authority. Post emergency activities, what all we do, details of first aid and hospital services available, because these things becomes relevant in case of emergency situation also. Okay. So we shall continue our session with fire safety and then structure of disaster management plan. We will discuss how you need to implement emergency or disaster response plan, because the problem with most of the organization are that they prepare some plan, but it will remain same for next 3, 4, 5 years. So this plan should be dynamic. It should keep on reviewed at minimum interval of at least 1 year time period, and then it should become live document. Okay. So now I would like to hear from the participants. There are a few questions. Let me take quickly. What are the things to be considered for effective management plan? And before we leave the session, I'll request everyone to keep your camera on so that we can take the group photograph digitally. We are doing this session digitally, but let's have a group graph of the session. So there are a few questions. What are the things to be considered for effective management plan? We shall be covering this aspect tomorrow because I already mentioned that. Is there any guideline, NDMA guideline or international guideline? Yes, so related to fire safety, if you are asking, there are NDMA guidelines specific to some of the sectors, but not specifically for the power companies. There are international guidelines available. Yes, definitely. These things are available. And sector specific guidelines are always there. Okay, some of the name, for example, there is NDMA guidelines for hospitals specifically, but for power sector we have very good references from Central Electricity Authority. CA is the good reference for that. Complete real-time example of mitigation preparation response. We already discussed. Cycle tomorrow may be given. Okay, already discussed. So these are some of the questions which are there. Now I'll request everyone to come online or on camera and let's see to each other. We'll have the group photograph on the team, and also we have not done any introduction from the participants. So if any one or two participants at least introduce yourself, just to understand from which all companies you are there, or any input or feedback from your side for this session, I would like to take that also. So there are still a lot of cameras which needs to be activated. There are more than 60 persons, but we are seeing only very okay. Some are responding that camera is not there. Okay, so whoever is having camera, you can open that. There is okay. Mr. Verma is from Department of Atomic Energy. Okay, that's great, sir. So you can put your introduction also, from which all organization you are there. So now we can see some of more cameras. Power Grid Madurai. Good. So if someone would like to give feedback of today's session, uh, considering the timeline, we had tried to cover most of the aspects planned for today. I'm taking screenshots. Uh, So you can unmute yourself and speak if you want to share any feedback of today's session. Okay. So a lot of chats are coming. I'm trying to read them. As a real-time example of disaster cycle to reinforce the understanding. Okay, we'll take it up. Definitely, sir, we'll take it up. Anju Pathak from Safety Department, BSCS Yamuna Power Limited. Okay, I'm from GETCO. Atomic Energy Heavy Water Plant. Water Department. Energy. So, any specific suggestion or feedback so that we can consider if there is any input from you? ATR manufacturing. So, manufacturing, electrically, SGVN Limited also. Shubhamji has given a lot of input during the session. Mr. Rakesh Kumar at Safety and Quality. So anyone would like to speak anything about the session today? I can see some mics are already on unmute.
Any feedback from you, please give your feedbacks. It will be beneficial for us.
And we'll try to consider for tomorrow's session also. If there is anything.
Kindly give your
yes, sir. I want to
please
say
speak.
something, sir. Hello.
Yes,
I am
please.
Parasuraman. I am Parasuraman from Heavy Water Plant Tuticorin. Today's program was very nice, and you have organized it in systematic way. What I want to add is there any procedure, systematic procedure to develop any general disaster management plant with you? If it is available, then we can.
Okay, so we will spend some time on the structure of disaster management plan, how it should be, what all it should have. So I showed you briefly about the structure of disaster management or emergency response plan, which is mandated by Central Electricity Authority 2011 regulations. So that is relevant for the power companies who are qualified to be an electrical plant, and the companies who are involved in transmission. So if you are part of that, then it is your structure. If you are not part of that, I'll show you some good disaster management plan. As an example, tomorrow we'll start the session with the example of disaster management plan. That will help you.
Okay, thank you.
But it is a mandatory requirement for all the organization to have disaster management plan.
So this will help us to improve the disaster management plan. That is why I am asking.
Right.
Any topic if you want to include tomorrow's session? Anybody, please?
क्लोज करने में भी आवाज आए जा रही है मतलब अच्छा
Okay, so most of the questions are coming related to disaster management plan only. Okay.
Hello.
We shall.
So can I speak?
Okay. So we have got sufficient input. Let's connect tomorrow again. 2:30. Thank you so much. Slides you will get. You will receive the presentation after completion of both the days session. You will receive that both the presentations. Thank you. Thank you, Pawanji, for your feedback.
तो मतलब add to noting में करना पड़ेगा.
Focus on disaster in power sector with examples. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Any suggestion? Any more suggestion, please?
Sir, what is the difference between risk and vulnerability in terms of disaster management?
Okay. So these terms we will be covering tomorrow. So risk and vulnerability are different. So if we relate it with disaster, vulnerability is something which affects somebody. Like I'll give you an example of vulnerability. Although I will be discussing this in detail tomorrow. For example, the poor people at some place are more vulnerable to flood in comparison to the wealthy people. So it depends on the location. So there can be another vulnerability, like the persons who are situated near the coastal area are more vulnerable to tsunami in comparison to persons who are staying far away from the coastal areas.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Got the point.
Okay. Then thank you, Mr. Munish. Today we should close it. I'm thankful to all the participants that they have taken very good participation and asked a number of clarifications. Thank you very much. And I hope that Mr. Munish, that as per the suggestions of the participants, you will include the topics as they want you to be included tomorrow. Thank you very much for nice presentation and your explanations given for the disaster management. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
See you tomorrow. We are planning for more programs with you. So kindly
Sure,
see
sir.
which are the topics which will be more useful for the public.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Will do,
Just
sir.
request, you can suggest us the topic also.
Sure, sir.
In your future. Thank you.
Thank you all the participants. Thanks a lot.
Say,